So, gentlemen, Tesfa, Derrick, here we are.
Here we are.
Let's do this. I'm excited. We've actually got a little more time than I thought we were going to have, too. So, this will be really fascinating to see how it goes. So, I want to jump in with just an open thing to throw it out for everybody to hear us talk about why is it important now. And we may not need to go here, but let's just take a moment with each of us sharing one reason why it's important for this conversation even to happen, of why do we need to talk about race as it relates to the choral art form? Why do we need to talk about equity? Why do we need to talk about representation? Why are we even here?
I'll start because it's been yesterday was a day like I had some feelings yesterday. It's important for me because I don't want any other person to experience what I did later in life when you realize that so much of your early choral experience was spent singing songs that were meant to degrade people who look like you. We sang a lot of minstrel songs.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if anybody has I'm not sure if any I haven't heard anyone talk about as an adult the effect that it has on you as an adult, realizing that's what you did a lot of when you were a child, when you were a kid, and you didn't even know it. That's you. I dealt with some embarrassment as an adult. I went back and rethought some situations where there were people who would say that I was trying to act white because I was in choir. And maybe they knew about those minstrel songs and I didn't, and here I am. So there's a lot of stuff that I had to work through about that as an adult, and we don't think about that
Mm.
because we haven't had the space to talk about what it's like as an adult to realize you were doing things that really were harming you, and you didn't even realize it.
And taking joy in it. I think
Yeah.
about, Chingering Chaw was one of my favorite songs to sing. And I would do it so well. Ching, 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 chaw. Like I could just, and I hear William Warfield singing that, someone I looked up to.
Hmm.
And so for me, it was a little bit of guilt of not knowing, even as I was beginning to teach and direct choirs and having them do the unison version of those Copeland songs and do every one of them, not knowing the context behind some of them. So I do feel with you there. It's that shame as an adult, figuring out yourself, but also the fact that I've been a part of perpetuating the culture too.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And as we look at the macro conversation, is that if people can just come to the realization that the system is rigged, y'all, the system is rigged. And if an organization is not looking to do everything in its power to fix it, at this point we have to call that complicit. And if we're really talking about choral music as being a community, as Derrick, I mean, one of the things Derrick said, you can scroll up. I said that's a sermon right there. Amen. Like you can come inside of an elevator and start singing, that don't make you a community. And so if you have brown, black, and indigenous people in your ensembles, and you aren't actively looking to tear down the rig system and rebuild anew, you are now complicit. And I know that's hard to swallow, and maybe everybody's not there, but I mean I think we have to be there.
Yeah.
That's a great point. And I do want to say to Susie, there is a list that someone has curated. I know one of you fabulous educators who knows the list that I'm referring to. We've started curating the list of songs. Like even Shenandoah is one of those that we need to consider and think twice about. It's a mind-boggling list of
Yeah.
songs that we sing that we need to think twice about singing. So if someone can put a link to that in the chat, that'd be great. If not, I'll find it and put it on our resources later. Complicit. Yeah, Tesla,
Can
go
I
ahead.
push back for a second and just ask you, if we had to pick a battle,
Hmm.
would you say is the battle in the repertoire or is the battle in the action post concert?
I think it's a little of both, Tesla. I think
Where would you focus the
it's a good
percentage?
point.
If you broke down a percentage of where would you focus the bulk of your energy?
I focus the bulk of my energy not in the repertoire. So I have a little more grace and space myself in the repertoire that I choose because I think it's all about context with some of them. So I'm going to say Shenandoah, for instance. I think I can still sing Shenandoah knowing that there's some confusion about the history, and I would set that up and contextualize it before rehearsing it, during the rehearsal process, and for the audience singing it. Now, there's some pieces that are out there. Here's a story for you all, true story. When I was early as a teacher, I was the coordinator for the festival in Georgia. We do the festival system a little differently down there, the large group performance evaluation. But a wonderful teacher came in and her choir was singing the Linda Spevacek American Rhapsody medley that you all know. Gonna jump down, turn around, pick a bella cotton. Gonna jump down, turn around, pick a bella day. Oh, Lordy, pick a bella. You all know that song, right? They started singing it beautifully as they always do. And a parent was livid, flipped out, found me as the coordinator and came to me and said, you know, they shouldn't be singing that song. And I listened to her. And my response at that time was, well, this is a great piece of choral literature. And yes, I'm a Black man and I know that we were enslaved persons, but that's not what we're singing about right now. Like, I had a whole list of reasons as to why it was okay for them to sing that song at that time, because that wasn't the battle that I was going to fight then. That's 20 years ago. Now I would totally fight that battle and I would have stopped that piece from being performed. Because there is a line to cross with the ones where, you know, think about Minnesota All-State. Many of you know what happened with the TTBB choir last summer. It was real for us. And we made the right call. We made the right call to stop that piece. Derrick, did you want to say something on that?
Yeah, I was going to say one of the places for me that I've had to realize, you know, where you talk about realizing now the battle you fight that you may not have when you were younger. I used to program. I was taught when you're teaching middle school, junior high school, where choirs with limited ranges, you got to find. It's really hard to find repertoire that fits those limited ranges. So you got to do this music. And so I was doing things like Je le vous dirai. It was a wonderful, like 3-part. It was perfect. But then I realized and learned about the meaning of that, and learned that it was about, it's about a man who's upset because his wife is out being very free, and then he gets upset and he commits suicide, and she kills herself to go to hell where he is. But it's a great arrangement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it fits all the ranges, and people love it. But I didn't. But and in the way that it's published, you don't see that those are the lyrics, that those are the exact lyrics. They have been cleaned up a little bit, but just because they've been cleaned up doesn't take away the original intent. And what I've learned in a lot of conversations that I've had with teachers and composers is because of the Google machine, people find things.
Yes, indeed.
And so they have been approached because what you have all been in this place. People will go to your administrator before they come to you sometimes. And sometimes that's out of fear because they want to buffer in between that conversation. But by the time it gets there, it's too late. And then as conductors, we're like, well, wait, what? And so then we're coming into this conversation with everybody kind of like, Urgh. So I think part of my job now is to say, like, I have done these things. I'm just telling you now, like, it does have we can't use those musical standards to wipe away the fact that the music is difficult. So maybe now you have to now begin to maybe make your own music. That, I watched the choir sing Il Bianco, and they hands together and they're swaying, and I was like, I'm very uncomfortable. And they're going, de mille morte de mille. I use this one is not, in the race and diversity and equity inclusion, but it's about belonging and representation. And it's it's about heteronormative love, and de mille morte is, you better go look up what that means in the context of that time. That is some nasty stuff that you're talking about with your high school singers, and we have to be cognizant of that. And I say that again to talk about how we use these things that we've learned as standards for best practice that allow us to escape the responsibility of looking farther and going, well, you know what, it fits the range, but I can't do this piece of music. And that means you need to go back and find something else. Or maybe as teachers, we create something else. There is no special composition gene.
Yeah.
We can create some of those resources for ourselves.
I love that you just shifted beautifully into the next, I think, logical space is how do we expand what people consider as appropriate literature for choirs to sing? Both the repertoire that we sing, the genres that we cover, and then the vocal production that comes with it. We all were trained a certain way and with certain things that had a hierarchy. How can we reframe that hierarchy so that notated score and oral learning can be here? And Western European bel canto singing and other singing forms can be here more equal to provide that representation in the space.
Yeah.
Tesfa, you want to take that first?
Absolutely. I will say this is a big conversation, especially as all three of us have experienced the oral tradition. Derrick, your dissertation, if I'm not mistaken, is actually on the oral tradition.
Yeah.
And You know, as I think about growing up in the oral tradition, I think about how even in my blackness, there was a hierarchy where non idiomatic music was raised over my traditional idiomatic performance. And I'm not saying that we need to exclude non idiomatic black music. I'm saying that we need to be willing to do the homework. Where's the work going to come? Because I'm going to be honest with you. I got a spiritual arrangement that I did at age 18 that's unacceptable. Of Swing Low Sweet Chariot, that if you were to listen to the open and go bum dee dee swing, and guess what? There's a great video of Vocal Essence singing it right
Yes, there
now
is.
on the on the YouTubes that you could go find. But when I think about that piece and I think about it in a larger construct, you look, that piece for me is not okay. Like, but so just because you program a black composer, that's not enough homework. Like even when you look at Andre Thomas's Going Up to Glory, that's not enough homework. There has to be a little bit more conversation. And one of the things I said to Westminster last week was Molly Stone. If you're not familiar who she is, Molly Stone is basically doing phenomenal work from Chicago's Children's Court. She's telling people, listen, instead of you programming your concert, why don't you go as an empty slate, go into this community and learn from the people within that community, pay them the money that they deserve for their knowledge and for their inspiration. But why don't you actually do something like that at the local level? So many people keep talking about global this, global that. Look, just go to North Minneapolis. There are places all over Minnesota that you can go and do tons of learning. So as we think about world music, it starts right in our community in St. Paul and in Minneapolis and other places around the state of Minnesota.
And that whole term world music, we're going to come back to too.
Good.
Just the way we talk
I'm
about
through.
it, right? We'll get there in a second. But Derrick,
Yeah,
let you
you know,
respond.
I was going to say, this Tesfa brought up something that I've been talking to folks about a lot, particularly this summer with our Twitter lectuals that are really finding their sorry, that was a shady term, but it's a true
That was
term.
so shady.
Um, we have a lot of people inundating you with a lot of information, and it's so important to recognize. I'm glad that we all three of us have shared places where we've grown around this, because it's not safe to assume that just because someone is from a minoritized population that they have the knowledge and the knowledge um, of the history of the way Black folks have interacted with their own culture. We are not a monolith, and so I've learned a lot. I've had to learn a lot, you know, about even just using different pronouns for folks. I've had to learn a lot about that. Just because I know my own perspective as a Black man, that doesn't mean I know about all of the other folks who are minoritized. So it's really important that when we're talking about vetting literature, that we vet who we allow into our classrooms and who we allow into our space to talk to us about these best practices, because there's a lot of stuff out there, a lot of things happening that could be confusing to you, confusing because it confuses me.
I'm glad you said that because, and this is a little bit of a digression. I'm going to steal your digression for a moment here.
I know. Sorry.
I like to do that too. Those who know me know I go down tangents. But we're in this space of cancel culture now. And I actually saw an article about it, which is so funny. I've been talking about it 3 days in a row, of how there are a lot of people out there who are now experts in racial equity workshops. Like my wife was watching one. For those who don't know, my wife is white, and so she was watching one, and she prepares to be recertified. And they're like 18-year-olds at the institution where I went to school, University of Georgia, leading this workshop. And I'm like, while there's a lot I will learn from an 18-year-old, and I will respect and want to listen, as I listen to those conversations, that's not the information that I really want to be shared as a definitive standpoint for the conversation that's important right now. So to what Derrick's saying is just really take everything you're hearing in, listen to it, let it wash over you, process it, sit and live in that discomfort, because all of us are living in discomfort right now, and then go back and just see what you need to shed and where you need to go seek more information. So I guess I'm just saying, don't take it all as the truth when you hear it from one person, because in just a moment, I know I'm going to take us in a conversation where we will all three probably have a different perspective on it. And I want to just model that it's okay, that there's a lot of, and I'm using race here intentionally, we're talking about Blackness, and representation of people of color. It's not black and white though. There's a lot of gray area that we're going to be living in this new normal that we're trying to get to of actual equity. and equal representation, and it's going to take us a while to get there. Can we agree to have this space where we can all say something, and if it doesn't come out right, just say, I'm sorry, that's not what I meant to say, or that was not my intention. Let me say that again. And then we give each other the space to restate it rather than jumping on each other. And I'm saying that out loud for me too, because there's been some things that have been said where I just want to like jump down someone's throat, and I have to catch myself and go, wait. You said some dumb things too, Shoultz. You have. So I want to take us here. I want to go to this spot now. Cultural appropriation. I've been on record as saying, and I'll open it up with a controversial statement, that appropriation, the word itself, is not necessarily a negative thing. The definition, the actual definition of appropriation, is not necessarily a negative thing. Now, having put that controversial statement out there, let's talk about cultural appropriation as it relates to our music, because this is really tough right now. We've got composers who are Black, who write things in our style. We have composers who are white and other cultures who write things in the Black style. Sometimes the music written by the white composers sounds and feels more authentic than the music written by the Black composers. What do we do with that? Like, can a white composer arrange a spiritual authentically? Can a Black composer arrange a spiritual? And Tesfa, you kind of gave this away earlier.
Oh, I gave it away.
Arrange a spiritual and it not really be the way we want to go. Let's just jump in the middle of this, because this is where people want to go. We've got repertoire to choose. How do we do that authentically when it comes to the Negro spiritual in particular, but also gospel, jazz, blues?
Derrick, you want to jump in, or you want me to?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll start out with my thoughts on this. I know what I think that there's like there's appropriation, like what it denotes, and then I think there's some connotation, right? Some context for the word. So for me, I think it's focused on, I call them ethical arrangements. What makes something an ethical arrangement? Are you giving people credit, the originators of this work credit? For example, we just had a situation in our state that we all had to work through, because there was a piece that was performed and it takes the spiritual and it was perceived that it was trying to repurpose it in a more global way than what it was necessarily intended to be. And it incorporated some elements that are not commonly found in spirituals. And so there was some difficulty with that, because what we don't get in the music, we don't get how you got access to that. We don't get how you learned about these styles. We don't get how you learn about the spiritual. Same thing with music. It happens more with music from other countries. So I've seen so many people who will take a South African tune, something from a Xhosa tribe, and arrange it and won't tell you anything about where they got it from. That is bad. That is appropriation. And I will take somebody else's music and reappropriate it for your own purchases. And that's how we've been allowed to function. And we haven't questioned folks. And we've seen people have times on Facebook where they've had to work through some stuff around it, because it has been a privilege for our white composers to be able to not have to do that, because the assumption is you've already done that work, which assume you've done it. But I will tell you that from some of our non-white composers, we don't get that same latitude, and it's immediately discounted or scrutinized, because it's not what Andre Thomas did, so it can't be right. Or it's not what Derrick Fox did in his, to give me just a little more time, so it can't be right. So we're held to the standard that other Black folks have done before us, or it wasn't in this book, so it's not right. While some of our other folks can take music and do whatever they want to with it and say nothing about it, or they can say, we're going to repurpose it and do something else. But if I did that, folks will come for me. Yeah. And now we're in a time where folks are coming for everybody, and it doesn't feel really good. And we need to not feel good about it, because everybody needs to recognize that I don't think music is a universal language. I think music can be a universal experience if we're all in the room and we're working towards the same. But you don't listen to a piece that I do and get the same expression from it, because we all interact with our cultures and our music in very different ways, and we need to recognize that. So when I see somebody who takes a song and says, I'm going to repurpose that, I'm going to repurpose that music that was written out of the grief and the sorrow and the death of folks who look like me, and try to make it into this global message for everybody, I have a problem with that.
Yeah. And
Derrick,
that happens. And we can say that there are a lot of publishing companies who see this as an opportunity. And this is what happens is we look at the words and we look at the overall message, and there are most of the people who interact to with the piece that we know that we're speaking about, we won't
yes,
be petty in name,
yep,
that has been recently released. Most people see it as a unifying piece.
mm-hmm,
Most people, and the problem is that having that conversation, to go back to what Phillip says, becomes cancel culture. Because if you have a conversation about the specific piece, people feel attacked, and that's a part of the fragility that we need to work through as well. When I think about the pernicious effect of us, like what Derrick just brought up, us using it and repurposing and not actually giving credit, like, and not actually giving credit to people who have done it. I can go back to a moment with Room Full of Teeth that just happened recently. I don't know if y'all remember this. They were talking about Caroline Shaw's Partita in
mm-hmm,
Eight. And, you know, one of the projects that I know somebody's working on right now, that they're working on a white composer with a black spoken word artist. And what they're trying to do is basically say, if we are creating art in this way, are we willing to put money towards it? Are we willing to donate money towards actually creating systemic change? And some people might call this musical reparations. It's in its infant stages. I don't know what this project will ultimately look like, but there are people who are now seeing that the work that they have been doing when performing white composers in a derivative style is not okay, and they are at least starting a conversation to say, let me put $2,000 towards this organization as a part of this project.
yeah.
And
Let's
that's
let's.
what Room Full of Teeth did.
Mhm. Thank you.
Can I add on something real quick, just to clarify something I said earlier? Look, I want to be sure. Why I brought up Andre Thomas in his book, I didn't realize this until I was on a webinar that he was talking about, and he spoke about his compositions and how there were two other really well-known black composers who were giving him different critiques about his music.
Yep.
But I haven't heard that same scrutiny for white folks who were writing spirituals and gospel at that same time. So he was getting the scrutiny that I'm not sure everybody else was getting. So it was fascinating for me to hear that he was going through some of the things that I've experienced, and that it's still happening. Folks are being allowed to get away with some things that people that minoritized folks have not been, in terms of publishing companies and things. So we can be the people who drive that kind of change if we don't, if either we challenge people who write this music this way and just say, by not buying it anymore, or if you do decide to buy it and program it, you have to talk about it, you have to name the problems with it. Naming is where we fall short. If you buy a piece of music because you love it, you have to be willing to talk about it and name the issues, so that your students aren't like me and come later to find out they were singing a piece that really was not very, didn't put them in a very high position. So anyhow, I just wanted to make sure I clarified that, so no one thought I was saying anything negative or about that book, about Andre Thomas. I think he's been doing wonderful work well before I was on the scene, but it was fascinating to know that he experienced some of the exact same things that we have.
Yeah, and for those of you who remember Dr. Thomas Andre coming to ACDA Minnesota last year, it seems like so long ago, but he shared his stories about Dawson and Jester Harrison, and how he didn't appreciate the spiritual. He thought it was a mockery of our culture and didn't like them. And you can hear more of his story about
Yeah,
that, how he did get
fascinating.
this back and forth about the things he needed to add to his compositions. So I want to push both of you a little further, interject, because we do know, it's so funny how we know that piece that you brought up, Derrick. I know all about what happened there in Nebraska as well. And so what came to my mind right away was, Derrick, you don't know the choir that I found it, but everyone in the room does. Tesfa does especially. I
Mhm.
thought if that piece had been composed with me, with the vocalescent singers of this age as the choir, would we see it in the same way as we do now, knowing that it was composed for the group that it was composed for and the conductor that it was composed for? And so I just put that out there in the space of, because I'm with you, of if you're not careful taking and repurposing stories and deep expressions and experiences of our people in a way that's global without paying that tribute to it and keeping in mind the the meaning behind it, is dangerous. So
Yeah,
that's where I kept processing was, what if it were a different choir, a different collaboration, and it had been birthed in a different way? Would we have accepted it? And so that leads to this question is, what's the framework that we can give everybody in the room? Like, what are some tangible ways that we can help people to know? We call it doing the homework, but
yeah,
in terms of arranging in our Black idiomatic styles, what is that we need to do? What do the white composers need to do? White conductors, choirs of mostly white people need to do to show that we've done what we need to do to be able to present this? Some of it's probably before, some
yeah,
of it's doing, and some of it's after. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
yeah. Do you want me to talk? You want me to Tesfa? You want me to say, or you to me or Tesfa?
And you both can take it. Yeah. So take turns. Why don't you
Okay,
start, Derrick? Mhm.
okay. For me, the thing. This is just me and what I need to see. I value that people model what we want our students to do, which is figure out how to talk to each other. Here's a prime example of that. I have a friend for many, many years that we've known each other, but recently I had some text about my feelings around around George Floyd, and he was like, oh my God, I feel inspired, I need to write a piece of music. I said, okay, let's talk. And we talked about we've known each other, oh my God, for over 25 years, and we've never talked about race or equity, diversity, inclusion, and we finally talked about it, and he was like, I never knew that. And it changed the way he wrote the piece. It changed the ideas that he put, because he knew he knew me, he knew things about where we lived, but he didn't know my experience, because I've talked to him. I didn't let him see me that way, because I knew there would be consequences if people saw me as a Black man. There are consequences, and it's real. And so there are some of us who've been taught to come to um, minimize the potential for trouble, because we know that it could escalate in a way that was dangerous. And it's unfortunate, but it's just the truth about my own lived experience. um, and so what we had to do was have a real tough conversation, because he's a great composer, but he didn't really have the vision that he thought he had based on the books he read and the research that he's done and the doctoral research and all that kind of stuff. But I always tell people, there is no amount of doctoral research that you can do that will ever give you the clearest picture of somebody telling you about their lived experience as a person from a minoritized position. And he was like, wow, I didn't know that. And it changed that piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to think that any other composer who goes down that road would have the same kind of experience.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll hop in and say Janet Helms has a phenomenal document. Basically, it talks about stages of racial identity development. So, Phillip, as you said, create a framework. If you can access everybody this PDF, this is a great place for you to start. What Derrick just described is called contact, where people said, I had no idea. And so if you look over to the right hand side, everybody, this is page 2 of the PDF, just past it. Contact. This is the first time this person has been in contact with Derrick's blackness in that way. And
Mm-hmm.
so Janet basically pushes you down the chart as you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and you work all the way through there. When you look at number 6, and you think about where you fall, this is why this conversation is so difficult. It's because we fall in different parts, and when you start talking to your students will also fall in different parts. There will be students who will come into your classrooms this year, and rightfully so, asking you to decolonize your institution. And there'll be some students saying, I see the unity and the community in this universal language. And we have to understand, as Phillip brought up earlier, there's so many shades in between number 1 and number 6 as we start to wrestle with white identity. So that means even if you are in a predominantly white organization, let's say you are in some part of Minnesota that only has one Black person in the entire town, it's still your job to start wrestling with stages of white identity. And this is a free resource, and make sure you quote Janet Helms. And I know that there's a floating, I don't know if y'all seen it, there's a great anti-racism document that gives people ways that they can interact with media content and help them. So you can read these words and say, I still don't get it. Does anybody have that Google Docs nearby that they can just pull up? I can't get, let me see if I can get to mine really quickly. And I did not create this, so this is one that's just floating out there, but it's a scaffolded anti-racism document that's out there. There's some places that you can sharing it in Zoom right now, and it allows you to interact with media content, as we know how media can influence and begin conversations that we wouldn't know how to begin. This gives you a way to do so. So if you click on that document and you look over to your right, you'll see contact, white privilege, unpacking the invisible knapsack, whistling Vivaldi. These are ways that you can start to move people through all of these stages within your choral environments. And as you're thinking about teaching remotely, using a resource like this can be so beneficial because people can access this content at their own time. I will say the racial bias test at Harvard, that me personally, I know that it's problematic and don't necessarily, sorry, Mike, I know I love you, I love Harvard, but I know that there are people pushing against the racial bias test right now. I am not necessarily prescribing it.
Right. Thank you, Tesfa. And I think that it was great that you took us very quickly, because many of you in the room are in spaces where there may not be a lot of minorities present, people from minority identities present in your space, in your choirs, in your schools, in your communities. And Tesfa very passionately and rightfully said, we all still need to be having these conversations, because I think it's in those spaces where it's most vitally important that we reconsider what we do and what we present as choral artists, because we know that people will accept more through the lens of culture and art to change their perception of society and reality than in any other way. If you talk about it, it becomes politics. We know this isn't a political conversation, but in their minds, it becomes politics. When we sing about it, we paint about it, we do a play about it, we engage artistically, people's minds can be open, their hearts can be softened, where you can follow up with intentional dialogue. So one of the things at Vocal Essence that we have made a commitment, this 52-year-old organization, to say that we are wanting to become leaders in the movement to bring anti-racism to the choral practice. And we are challenging everything about our institution, which is really hard for an organization 52 years old. The founding conductor, who is a mentor and a gift to us all, is still there. And he's engaged in this too, of looking at what have we done well. We've amplified wonderful composers and artists. We brought them to the stage. What have we done poorly? We still haven't developed lots of authentic relationships in communities of color. So we've performed, and I've made this analogy. Those who know me know that I love food. We are great at Vocal Essence at throwing a party. And it's like, come to my table. I'm going to cook for you. You can bring a bottle of wine. You can bring some cheese, but I've got the menu. I've got the barbecue. I've rubbed it. It's sitting, it's waiting, show up. And where we need to go now is we need to go shopping together.
Yeah.
We need to plan the menu together. We need to cook side by side. So it's conversation, it's relationship building, so that we can get to the place where we can collaborate.
Yeah.
So that we can figure out what that looks like to perform together. It's messy and it takes a long time to get there.
Well, can I offer a
Sure.
challenge? So one of the things is, like I say, I bring up these things, but I also want to put some action here, because we've been conversing for a long time, and now we need some action. So one of the ways that I think some of these situations that we have in our states where literature becomes a place of contingency is our organizations can be more intentional about asking folks who conduct their all-state choirs or whatever choirs that they're bringing people in, why are you conducting what you're conducting?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about how this piece is going to enrich our students. Tell me how this piece is going to, asking those questions of your conductors, so that if you find a place where a piece doesn't maybe align with something that your state, but I'll tell you, Nebraska is not very diverse at all. And we have some things happening in our state that you may not have that have happening in your state. But I had to go back to the organization, and I had to challenge, because there were some teachers that were ready to come in and do some things. And so we now have a committee, and I'm challenging this committee, one, to do the work about themselves. Like, I've asked them, do you know what the definition of culture? Do you know what race is? Do you know what ethnicity is? And do you know how they're not different, or places where they intersect? Because when we start building these policies now, where we're going to ask conductors, talk to us about this program. What are our students going to learn from? How is it going to challenge our students? Not notes, but how is it going to challenge our students intellectually, right? We don't want to just do a 20-part piece because it's an all-state choir. We do 20-part piece. How are our students going to grow from this experience as people? Because we say choir makes us better people, but if we're only worried about doing the hardest pieces, or the newest thing, or the flashiest technique, then we actually aren't worried about the growth of our people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to challenge some people who've been conducting these choirs for years. It's going to give voice to some people in your state who feel like they haven't had a voice, because they may not be able to serve on your boards because they're teaching choir and band and PE and have 5 kids. They don't have time to be on the board for 6 years. And so when these folks are not in our spaces, we have to be sure to speak for their concerns as well. And challenging your conductors about the literature that they are doing is not a bad thing, folks. And if anybody you ask to conduct these choirs pushes back on you in a way about this, then maybe you ought to reconsider who we have conducting our choir. Same thing about our adjudication. I talked to someone who said, we just don't think the people who are adjudicating have enough background to be able to hear all these different styles. Then don't ask them, or ask them to get in the know. And then you invite them to come in and adjudicate at your festivals and things. We have more power than we realize to ask our organizations to make these changes for the purposes of helping us. We don't have to do it the same way it's been done just because it's been done that way. And you don't have to be afraid to rock the boat, because then it means you have to do the work. Maybe we need to step up and do the work. But there are things that we can challenge our organizations to do. With the situation in Nebraska, I do really think that if our state had have asked these questions, that piece might still be on the program, because we got some insight into, after the questions were asked, we got some insight into the piece, and it was like, oh,
yep,
maybe some of the people were a little more comfortable with that. But once the damage has been done and the picture has been painted, it's too late.
Yeah. Amen.
I will step down.
No, you're great. I want to build on that, because Minnesota needs to hear this. The second step is how do kids get into those choirs? And I've had the pleasure of directing the Minnesota All-State Choir. It was phenomenal, but it didn't look as representative as the state of Minnesota is. The singers were not as representative as the singers I see each and every week, and it's because our oral preferences interfere with what we really need to be listening to. We are just evaluating the aesthetic, the tonal aesthetic that we have perpetuated as the model, rather than the various series of musical skills, subsets of skills that we want these young musicians to have. What if we change the way we did the all-state model so that we could make it a little bit more open and less focused on what we want to hear and what we were taught to hear, and more focused on including outstanding musicians? What if every all-state conductor had to teach a piece by oral tradition? When I did the Georgia All-State Choir, which is my home, so I really went in deep, I didn't perform anything by a composer that anyone would consider a classical composer. Ulysses A.K. was my classical composer. Everybody else was living, and the spiritual was the third piece in the program, because it fit the narrative of the program. So Patty asked earlier, should we avoid Hairston and Dawson and all those folks? No. You got to sing them and just teach people how to do it and why the dialect's there, and bring in someone to help with that. Tesfa, you get the last word, because we got 2 minutes.
All right, last word would be, I'm sitting here rocking back and forth like I'm in my old Baptist church, sitting on the first row as a member of the motherboard. Because as I'm hearing y'all two brothers preach right now, my spirit is feeling the moving. I am feeling something special. Because there isn't much to add, y'all, is that this is laid out. This is laid out. If you really listen to this, I think this bit can be excerpted, and people can look at these links and start to go in to start digging. As Derrick says, what is the action step that you can take? And you have to figure out, based on your level of comfortable If you're not comfortable jumping right in to the, you know, as Helms laid out towards the end of that project, and you just need to start a conversation, and you call Phillip, I know for a fact Phillip is gonna answer the phone and say, "Yeah, let's talk." Don't expect that work to be free. Because one of the pieces that I use for music and social justice is that knowing that we were eventually moving into this era where we're gonna have to wrestle with this, there's an assumption that people of color are gonna do this work for free. And if you listen to Kendrick Lamar's For Free, you will understand. If you watch that video and wrestle with what your eyes are seeing, you're gonna realize that there's a conversation happening that we are not even ready for. And so that's all I got. I ain't got nothing else to add after the sermons I just heard Phillip and Derrick deliver. I'm just rocking back and forth, y'all.
Take me to the. I'm not gonna do that. You know, it's so great to share this space with both of you. Derrick, we're new friends, but I knew we were kindred spirits. I look forward to continuing this conversation. And Tesfa,
Yes.
we go way back. So, all of you, when we're able to get out of this pandemic and we can have barbecue again,